Family was supposed to be the one place where effort was remembered, where sacrifice was carried forward with gratitude instead of being quietly consumed. I grew up believing that if one of us stumbled, the others would instinctively close ranks. I became the sibling who acted on that belief without hesitation, the one who responded first when something went wrong. When stress entered the room, I stayed calm. When money became tight for someone else, I found a way to stretch mine. Over time, reliability stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like my role. My brother's instability arrived dressed as bad luck rather than irresponsibility. A job didn't work out, a roommate moved out unexpectedly, bills stacked faster than income. None of it felt permanent. It sounded like a rough season that would pass once things aligned again. I listened without judgment and absorbed the weight of his situation, because that is what dependable siblings do. I didn't question whether he had a plan. I trusted that wanting stability was the same as working toward it. When the rent problem surfaced, the decision felt almost automatic. I told myself it would be for a short while, just enough to help him regain balance. I remembered childhood rooms, shared holidays, the unspoken understanding that family help was not a transaction, but a promise. Paying his rent felt less like giving money and more like reinforcing that promise. I convinced myself that this was how families survived hard chapters together. There was comfort in believing I was holding something together. Each payment felt like proof that our bond mattered, that my presence in his life had weight. I imagined that one day this story would be told differently, as a memory of mutual support rather than quiet imbalance. I carried a private pride in being able to help, in knowing that my effort was keeping a roof over someone I loved. Months passed without urgency, then passed again without acknowledgement. The arrangement extended itself without a single deliberate conversation. What began as temporary help slowly settled into routine. Rent due dates came and went, and I paid them with increasing efficiency. There was no resistance from him, no check-ins about how long I could sustain it. The silence itself became an answer, one I chose not to examine too closely. Small signals surfaced, but I dismissed them. Gratitude began to sound thinner, more assumed than expressed. Requests came without hesitation, framed as necessities rather than favors. I noticed how easily the subject changed when I hinted at my own expenses. Each sign was subtle enough to rationalize away, and I was skilled at doing exactly that. I told myself not to overthink generosity. My nights grew quieter and more calculated. I sat with rent receipts and bank statements spread across the table, adjusting numbers in my head while the rest of the house slept. I skipped purchases without announcing the sacrifice, convinced that restraint was part of being responsible. Budgeting became a private ritual, one that carried more weight than I admitted. I told no one how much effort it took to keep everything balanced. What unsettled me most was how invisible the help became. It was never mentioned in family conversations, never acknowledged as something ongoing. Publicly, nothing had changed. Privately, my financial support had become a foundation everyone stood on without looking down. I realized that my help did not elevate me in his eyes. It simply removed urgency from his. Still, I clung to the idea that loyalty meant endurance. I believed that consistency would eventually inspire responsibility, that patience would be met with respect. I mistook silence for stability and routine for agreement. Each month I paid reinforced a structure I did not design, but continued to support. I told myself that family bonds strengthen under pressure, unaware that pressure can also reshape them. By the time doubt surfaced clearly, the pattern was already established. What felt like kindness at the beginning had hardened into expectation. I could sense something shifting, though I did not yet understand its shape. I only knew that the balance between us was no longer equal, and that my loyalty was no longer a shared value, but a resource being quietly claimed. The moment help becomes expected, it stops being kindness and starts becoming ownership, though it rarely announces itself that clearly. It happens quietly, through routine, through repetition, through the absence of conversation. My financial support didn't change overnight. It simply stopped being discussed. Rent was no longer a topic we revisited, no longer framed as something I was generously covering. It became assumed, a background certainty, like electricity that everyone relies on but no one thanks. At first, I noticed it in the smallest ways. He stopped checking in around rent time. There were no updates about his finances, no mention of progress or setbacks. The due date came, and I paid, as I always had. The absence of acknowledgement felt strange, but I told myself it was a sign of stability. I convinced myself that this silence meant he was less stressed, that my help had worked. I didn't yet recognize that the silence also meant I had been removed from the equation as a person and reduced to a function. Gradually, his tone shifted. Conversations that once carried warmth now felt transactional. He spoke with certainty about plans that depended on money he did not have, plans that indirectly relied on my continued support. There was a casual dismissiveness in how he spoke about expenses, as if the safety net beneath him was infinite. Appreciation faded, replaced by a subtle impatience whenever I hesitated or asked questions. I began to sense that my reliability had lowered my value rather than raised it. My own life quietly shrank around the arrangement. I stopped planning trips because the idea of spending on myself felt irresponsible. Vacations were postponed indefinitely, always justified by the same reasoning that this phase would end soon. I delayed medical checkups, convincing myself that nothing was urgent enough to disrupt the balance I was maintaining. Every choice I made seemed to orbit around preserving his stability, even when it cost me my own. There was a strange pride in being needed, and that pride tangled itself tightly with guilt. I told myself that my sacrifice was proof of character, that being the dependable one was a strength. At the same time, unease crept in whenever I imagined what would happen if I stopped. The thought of pulling back felt dangerous, as if the entire structure would collapse and I would be blamed for the damage. That fear kept me compliant, even when my instincts urged caution. Occasionally, I tried to question the arrangement, but only in my own head. I rehearsed conversations I never had, measured words I never spoke. Each time, I chose peace over clarity. I convinced myself that bringing it up would create unnecessary tension, that family harmony was worth the discomfort I felt. Silence became my compromise, and I mistook it for maturity. The signs were everywhere if I had been willing to see them. Unopened mail piled up on my desk because I was afraid of confronting numbers that might force a decision. Calendar pages turned with no milestones marked for myself, only reminders of obligations. My phone stayed silent when it came to messages asking how I was doing, yet it always seemed to buzz when something was needed. These patterns formed a backdrop to my days, normal enough to ignore, heavy enough to shape everything. I started to notice how rarely my efforts were acknowledged outside of necessity. There were no conversations about gratitude, no reflections on what the support meant. It was as if the past months had been erased, replaced by a new baseline where my contribution was invisible. The more consistent I was, the less remarkable it became. Dependability turned into entitlement without ever passing through appreciation. Inside, conflict simmered. Part of me still believed in the story I had been telling myself, that this was temporary, that once he regained footing, everything would rebalance. Another part of me felt the quiet resentment building, the awareness that I was giving more than I could afford emotionally. I wrestled with the fear of being seen as selfish if I spoke up, even though the situation had already crossed a line I hadn't intended. What unsettled me most was how easily my role had been redefined without my consent. I was no longer the supportive sibling offering help. I was the solution to a problem that no longer felt like an emergency. My generosity had been absorbed into his expectations, reshaping the dynamic between us. I sensed that something fundamental had shifted, though I couldn't yet name it. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that circumstances would change and balance would return. I clung to that belief because it allowed me to avoid a harder truth. Each month reinforced the pattern. Each payment deepened the assumption. While I focused on maintaining the present, life was quietly preparing something permanent, something that would force this unspoken arrangement into the open, whether I was ready or not. Strength becomes a liability when everyone benefits except you. But it takes time to recognize that truth when strength has always been your identity. I had spent most of my life being the one who didn't need much, the one who adapted quickly and carried weight quietly. In my family, I was known as reliable, steady, unshakable. I rarely asked for help, not because I never needed it, but because I learned early that being low maintenance made everything smoother for everyone else. Outwardly, nothing seemed wrong. I showed up where I was expected to, handled responsibilities efficiently, and kept my composure intact. On the surface, I looked stable, even fortunate. Underneath that appearance, however, a different reality was taking shape. Emotional exhaustion crept in slowly, disguised as normal tiredness. I told myself I was just busy, just going through a demanding phase. I ignored how drained I felt at the end of each day, how relief only came when I was completely alone. Carrying financial responsibility alongside emotional neglect created a quiet pressure that never fully lifted. Every decision I made passed through an internal filter of obligation. I weighed my own needs against the potential consequences for others, and almost always came second. What made it heavier was the absence of recognition. There was no acknowledgement of the stress I absorbed, no curiosity about how I was managing it. The imbalance became psychological, not just financial, because it taught me that my endurance was expected, not valued. Family gatherings made that reality sharper. I would sit at the table, listening to conversations that never touched on the sacrifices happening behind the scenes. Laughter filled the room, stories were exchanged, plans were made, all built on a stability
replaced by
that
this
my
quiet
support
cold.
helped sustain.
I suppose
Yet my
memories cast the
contribution
longest
remained
shadows.
invisible, as
You
if
know,
it didn't
the
exist
most important
unless it
thing
was
is that we
urgently
support
needed.
each other.
Exactly.
I watched how easily
That's what
my
family
role was
values are all
overlooked,
about.
how natural it felt for
This
everyone to
family
assume
requires
things were fine
sacrifice and
because I
duty
wasn't
from
complaining.
all of us.
There was a constant
Only
fear
then
beneath
can we
my
remain
silence,
united.
a fear of disrupting the
I
fragile
know this is a
peace
lot
I'd
to
helped
ask,
create.
but you are the
I
only
worried
one
that
we can
speaking
trust
up
with
would
this.
make me seem selfish.
It has to be
that
you.
acknowledging my limits would erase the image of dependability I had cultivated. I told myself that families should not keep score, even as the imbalance became impossible to ignore. The thought of rocking the boat felt more threatening than continuing to quietly sink under its
I
weight.
thought I had everything under
As
control,
time
but now
passed,
I'm not so
my
sure.
body began to mirror
just so
what
much
my mind was
pressure.
carrying.
Take a breath.
Fatigue
It's gonna be
settled in
okay.
deeper than usual.
Technology
no
promised
longer
connection,
relieved by
but here
rest.
I am, alone
Stress
with this
followed
decision.
me into moments
It
that were
replaces
supposed to
conversation,
feel calm.
blurring the boundaries
I
we
noticed
need.
how often
With a
I
single
stared
tap,
at my reflection,
the last of it
searching
would be
for
gone.
signs that I was still okay, that I was
What
still the
choice did I
person I
have?
thought I was. Coffee cups sat untouched in
What
the
was
mornings
meant to be
because
temporary
even small routines
now
felt
carries an
exhausting.
unspoken sense
Nights
of
stretched
permanence.
long and silent, filled with thoughts I avoided during the day. I dismissed these signals as temporary, just another consequence of being busy and responsible. I pushed through discomfort because that was what I had always done. Asking for help felt foreign, almost
Every night,
indulgent.
the same
I
ritual.
convinced myself that
Placing each
slowing
item,
down would be a
hoping the
failure,
order here
that
brings
strength
balance
meant
to the chaos
endurance
outside.
without complaint.
We
Each
had to
time
make
my
cuts
body protested,
somewhere.
I responded by demanding more
The receipt
from it,
showed us where the
unaware of how
compromises
close I
began.
was to a breaking point.
The numbers don't
What
lie.
made the isolation
Even with
heavier
everything
was
accounted
the
for, the
absence
gap
of
keeps
space to be
growing.
vulnerable.
We can only cut
I
so
didn't
much
feel
before
like
there's
there
nothing
was
left.
room for my
Uncertainty
needs in the
visible in
narrative my
repeated
family had
recalculations.
accepted.
The
I
process
was
feels
the one
endless,
who managed,
offering
the
no
one
real
who held
solution,
things together.
only survival.
There was no role for me to fall apart, no expectation that I might need support in return. That unspoken agreement kept me silent even when
The
the
morning
strain
alarm.
became impossible
A
to
sharp
ignore.
interruption to shallow
Late at
sleep.
night, when the
I
house was
silence it
quiet,
sluggishly.
the weight felt
Relief
unmistakable.
never
I
comes,
sat with the
reinforcing
silence,
how
replaying
exhaustion has
moments I
settled
wished I
deeper
had
than
handled
rest can
differently,
reach.
conversations I had
There was a
avoided.
pause, a
The
moment where
stillness
resistance
amplified
almost surfaced.
everything I had been
But
suppressing.
the message was sent,
In those moments,
sealing the
I
commitment
sensed
once
that
again.
something was wrong.
He just sits
not
there,
just
completely
emotionally,
oblivious,
but
while I
physically.
feel like I'm running on
My
fumes.
body felt like it was carrying a
The
message
gap between
my
us
mind
widens every
refused to
day.
read. The strongest realization, though, was how alone I felt while being so essential. I was necessary, but not nurtured, needed, but not protected. The role I had embraced left no room for weakness, and over time, that absence began to erode me. I had mistaken resilience for invincibility, not realizing that even the strongest structures
Once again,
fail when
she
pressure
offered her
is
agreement.
constant and support
The compliance
is
was
one-sided.
costly,
By the
but the
time I
burden remained
acknowledged that something
entirely
was
her
off,
own.
the signs were already deeply rooted. The exhaustion was no longer just emotional, the stress no longer just situational. My body had been tracking every ignored
body
boundary,
carries what the
every
mind
unspoken
refuses to
resentment,
confront.
every sacrifice made without
The
acknowledgement.
words just blurred
It was
together.
responding in ways
My
I
focus
could no
drifted,
longer explain
and the
away.
entire office felt distant,
I would later understand
like I was separated
that the
by
cost
glass.
of being the strong
Despite the
one
recent
is rarely
setbacks, we
paid
must
all
maintain
at once.
perspective.
It
The data
accumulates
suggests a
quietly,
recovery is
stored in
underway,
tension,
provided we remain
fatigue,
vigilant.
and silence.
I canceled again.
Long before anyone
Sometimes the
noticed,
quiet isn't
long before
restorative,
I
it's just
admitted it out
heavy.
loud, my body
Another
had
night of
already
silent
recognized
endurance.
the price I was
The
paying.
returns are in, but the
moment
numbers
I
no longer
needed
fit
help
as neatly
was
as
the
before.
moment everything
We're stretching
I believed
thin,
about
but
family
discipline
was
requires
tested.
us to persist.
But it didn't arrive dramatically or all at once. The illness crept in quietly, disguised as exhaustion I couldn't sleep off, and discomfort I kept explaining away. At first, it felt inconvenient rather than alarming. I assumed my body was reacting to stress, that once things settled, I would feel like myself again. But instead of fading, the symptoms lingered,
The evening
growing
was
more
unusually
unpredictable
quiet.
and harder to ignore.
The diagnosis just
My
lingered in
carefully
the air,
controlled
heavy
routine
and
began
unresolved.
to unravel. Medical appointments appeared on my calendar where obligations used to be. Mornings that once followed a precise rhythm now
I'm not
started
feeling
with
very well
uncertainty.
and may
Waiting
need a
rooms
little
replaced
support.
workplaces, and
Sorry to
paperwork
bother you.
replaced plans. I tried to compress
No reply
appointments
arrives
into
immediately,
gaps between
silence stretching
responsibilities,
longer than
determined
expected.
not to
The
let
absence
this
of
interruption
response
affect
feels louder
anyone
than
else.
any rejection.
Each
When the
visit
reply
reminded
finally
me that
comes,
control,
it is brief and
something I
emotionally
relied on
neutral.
heavily, was
Concern is
slipping from my
absent,
grasp.
replaced by practical
Vulnerability
acknowledgement.
settled in
Searching for
alongside
warmth
fear,
that isn't there.
especially financial
The same
fear.
emptiness, the
I
same
calculated
distance.
costs the same
Illness
way I
has shifted
calculated
their
rent
value.
payments,
I was hoping we could
weighing
discuss the
every
deadlines. I'm
expense
finding it
against
hard
what
to
I
keep
was
up.
I
already
understand,
carrying.
but the Q3 report
The
is due
possibility
tomorrow.
of
I need the
instability
updated forecast by
terrified me
noon.
more than the
Support has not
diagnosis
arrived.
itself.
Only
I
awareness
worried
of
about
conditional
what would happen
care.
if I couldn't keep everything running smoothly, if my role as the reliable one
The
faltered.
body asserts
The
its
thought of
limits
becoming
without
dependent
negotiation.
felt unbearable, almost shameful. Telling my brother became a decision I postponed repeatedly. I knew that revealing my condition might shift the balance between us.
They don't even
and that
notice, do they?
awareness made me
The
hesitate.
world just keeps spinning,
I didn't
full
want
of
to
laughter and
introduce
sunshine,
uncertainty
completely indifferent
into
to
an
the darkness in
arrangement that
here.
already felt fragile. I told myself I would wait until I had clearer answers, until things were more manageable.
The walls are
In
bare,
truth,
the
I was
lighting
afraid
neutral,
of what his
offering shelter
response would
without
reveal.
comfort. The
When I
space feels
finally
safe enough to
shared what
rest,
was
but
happening,
not enough to belong.
I did so carefully.
The simplicity of what
choosing
she now
words that
owns is
softened the
striking and
reality.
humbling.
I framed it
Life
as
has narrowed
manageable,
into essentials
temporary,
only.
something I was handling. Beneath that restraint was a quiet hope that this moment would bring understanding, that family
The thing with your
loyalty
brother,
would
it's
surface when it
well,
mattered
it's not
most.
exactly clear. We thought it
I
was sorted,
expected
but now there are
concern,
complications.
or at least curiosity.
I'm not sure what to tell you.
What I received instead was a reaction so neutral it felt unsettling. He wasn't cruel or dismissive in an obvious way.
I remember the
There was
support
no
I
anger,
received,
no confrontation.
and I'm grateful.
There was simply a lack of
But
engagement,
that chapter is
an
definitely
emotional
closed.
distance that left the weight of my disclosure hanging unresolved. The conversation moved on quickly, as if my illness were a minor inconvenience
How much
rather
effort
than a turning
once
point.
went into maintaining
Messages
balance.
I sent afterward went
Without that
unanswered
effort,
longer
imbalance
than
reveals
usual.
itself naturally.
The silence felt louder than
A
any
choice
argument.
is made not to reach
Hospitals became
not
places
from
where
anger,
time
but from
blurred.
clarity.
Bright lights
Real-
reflected off polished
The
floors
East Asian
while I
female
waited
narrator
with forms
notices
in my
how
lap,
calm their body
filling in
feels
details
despite
that
the
reduced my
information.
life to check
There is
boxes.
vision. I've
I stared
realized
at my
that
phone
progress is
more
measured
often than I
internally,
wanted to admit,
not against
noticing
anyone else.
which messages never
And
came.
looking back now, my
Each
dreams.
unanswered notification
Evening
deepened
settles
the
gently,
realization that something
lights low,
fundamental had
atmosphere
changed.
calm and familiar.
I had believed illness
elder-
would trigger empathy, that it
As
would
night
remind him
deepens,
of our
an
shared
East Asian
history
female
and my
narrator
years
closes
of
her eyes
support.
with steady breathing.
Instead, it seemed to create distance.
Morning
as
begins
if my
without noise or
vulnerability
urgency,
complicated
light
a
filling the
dynamic
room
he
evenly.
preferred to keep simple.
An African-American
I
female
sensed
Breathing
a
is
shift,
steady, thoughts
subtle but
ordered,
unmistakable,
attention grounded.
in how he saw me.
Stillness now
I was no
feels
longer just
intentional
the
rather
strong
than
sibling.
imposed.
I was
Choices
now
no
a
longer
variable,
require
an
internal
uncertainty.
negotiation.
As my health
Clarity
demanded
handles
more
what
attention,
anxiety
the
once did.
imbalance between us became harder to ignore.
A thought of the
The
past
support
arises
I had
briefly,
given so freely
then
felt
fades without
suddenly
resistance.
conditional,
There is
dependent
no
on my
emotional
ability
charge.
to remain
The
useful.
South Asian male narrator
I realized
engages in
that
a
my
simple
illness
activity.
hadn't softened him. It had
Fully
exposed a
present and
truth I
unmeasured.
wasn't ready to face.
A
What I
moment of
thought would
silence
bring us
stretches
closer
without
had quietly
discomfort.
opened a door to
Stillness
something
now
far
restores
colder.
and drains.
The day he
Quiet
stopped
confidence
seeing me as
guides my
family
day.
was the
I
day
trust
he
my own
started
pace,
seeing me
pausing
as
without guilt,
disposable.
letting care
Though the
guide every
transformation
decision
didn't happen
naturally.
with a single conversation.
A brief
It
reflection
unfolded
surfaces.
gradually.
How
through
much
changes
energy
in
once
tone and
went into
structure,
maintaining
through
peace
the
for
way
others.
practical matters replaced personal ones.
Fatigue
As
is
my health
honored
declined,
instead of
our living
overridden.
arrangements became less flexible.
Care has
less
fully
forgiving.
replaced control.
The space that once felt shared began to feel conditional.
Strength now comes from
Conversations
alignment,
shifted from
not
concern
endurance.
to logistics. Emotional language disappeared, replaced by terms that sounded official and detached. He spoke about timelines and expectations as
Strength
if we were
once
no
meant
longer
endurance.
connected by history,
That definition
but by
no longer
obligation.
applies or holds power.
I noticed how
Strength now
carefully
lives
he
in
separated
discernment
my
and
illness
choice.
from the
Three
arrangement, treating it
A
as
familiar
irrelevant to
routine
the
unfolds
responsibilities
smoothly,
he now
free of
emphasized.
urgency.
Subtle
Each
power
movement
plays
feels
emerged where
intentional.
trust
Morning
used
light
to
returns
exist.
with the same softness as the
Reminders
days
arrived
before.
earlier
A young
and
adult
more
South Asian
frequently.
male narrator wakes
Deadlines
without
were
checking
mentioned
emotional
with an
temperature or
insistence
physical
that left
limits.
no room for discussion. There was a new distance in how
Evening
he interacted
settles
with
in
me,
calmly,
as though
the
creating
narrator
emotional
preparing for
space
rest
made it
without
easier to
reflection.
enforce
Choices no
boundaries
longer
that favored
require
him.
internal
Each
negotiation.
interaction reinforced
Clarity
a hierarchy
handles
I
what
hadn't
anxiety
agreed to,
once did.
but was now subject
Morning
to.
begins quietly,
The shock
sunlight
wasn't
spreading
just in
evenly
the
across the
behavior
room.
itself,
A
but in
middle-aged
what it
African-American male narrator wakes
Gratitude
without
had
expectation.
expired without notice.
The young
years of
narrator
support I
notices
had
how
provided were
silence
no
now
longer part
supports
of the
rather than
conversation.
pressures them.
When I
Stillness
referenced the
feels
past,
spacious.
it was
Evening
dismissed
settles
as
in
something
gently.
finished,
There is no sense of
something
incompletion
irrelevant to the
or
present.
unresolved meaning.
My
The day ends
contributions
whole,
were reframed
grounded
as
in lasting
favors
peace.
already
There is no
repaid by
metric
time
for
alone,
productivity or
stripped of
value
any
here.
ongoing significance.
Being present is
I
enough.
struggled to reconcile this version of him with the brother I thought I knew. The realization that my loyalty had an expiration date unsettled me deeply. I had assumed
As
sacrifice
the day moves
created
forward,
goodwill.
the African-American
that
male
effort built
narrator with a
protection.
thoughtful expression
Instead,
remains
it
centered
seemed to
and
have trained
balanced.
him to
Morning
see
light
my
returns
support as a
softly,
resource
unchanged by
rather than a
circumstance or memory.
relationship.
An East
The
Asian male
eviction
narrator
notice
in his
arrived
30s
without
wakes with a
ceremony.
grounded awareness.
A plain envelope sat on the table, its contents formal and unmistakable. My hands shook as I read words that reduced my situation to clauses and
A
deadlines.
moment of decision arrived.
There was no acknowledgement of
unburdened by
timing,
doubt.
no recognition
This wasn't
of my
about
health,
conflict.
no pause for compassion. It was efficient, cold, and final. The rooms around me felt suddenly unfamiliar. Spaces that once held
A moment of
routine
decision
now echoed
arrived,
with uncertainty.
unburdened by doubt.
I moved through them
This wasn't
slowly,
about conflict.
absorbing the reality that this was happening not despite our relationship, but within it. The notice wasn't just about housing, it was about erasing the story of my sacrifice, rewriting our history as something transactional and disposable. What hurt most
Morning
was
light
the
returns
clarity.
softly,
There was no
unchanged by
misunderstanding
circumstance or
left to
memory.
resolve.
An East
No
Asian male
explanation that
narrator in
could
his
soften
30s
the
wakes
meaning.
with a grounded
The
awareness.
eviction marked a line I couldn't
As the day
cross
moves
back
forward,
over.
the African-American
confirmed
male
that the
narrator
bond
with
I
a
had
thoughtful
protected for
expression
years
remains centered
existed
and balanced.
only as long as it served him. As I sat with the envelope in my hands, I understood that this wasn't the end of a living arrangement. It was the end of an illusion. The security I thought I had earned through loyalty had vanished the moment I needed it in return. And with that realization came a deeper reckoning about what I had given and what it had ultimately cost me. Nothing
warmth
prepares
left
you
with
for
them,
the moment
replaced
family
by this
chooses
quiet
legality
cold.
over loyalty.
I suppose
Especially
memories
when your
cast the
body is
longest
already
shadows.
fighting to keep
You know,
up.
the most important
Being
thing is that
evicted
we
while
support
sick
each other.
stripped
Exactly.
away any
Exactly.
remaining
That's what
sense of
family values
safety
are
I
all
had been
about.
clinging to. The notice
This family
was no longer
requires
just
sacrifice
words on
and
paper.
duty from
it
all of
became
us.
a countdown that
Only
followed me
then
through
can we
every
remain
room.
united.
Each day felt heavier
I
than
know
the
this is a
last,
lot to
not
ask,
because of the
but you are
physical
the
work
only
of
one we can
preparing
trust
to
with
leave,
this.
but because of
It
what
has
the
to be you.
eviction represented. It told me in the clearest terms possible where I stood. Illness changes how you experience everything. Tasks that once felt manageable now required deliberate effort. Packing a box felt like a negotiation.
I
with
thought
my
I
own
had
energy,
everything under control,
and
but
every
now I'm not so
pause
sure.
reminded me of my limits.
It's just so much pressure.
Humiliation
breath.
settled in
It's gonna be
quietly,
okay.
layered
Technology
over
promised
disbelief.
connection, but
I
here
kept
I am,
thinking there must
alone
be
with
some
this decision.
misunderstanding,
It replaces
some point
conversation,
where empathy
blurring
would
the boundaries
interrupt
we
the
need.
process.
With a single tap,
Instead, the process
last of it
continued,
would be gone.
steady and indifferent, as
But
if
what
my
choice
condition
did I
were
have?
irrelevant. What hurt just as much was the silence
what was
beyond
meant
him.
to be temporary
Extended family
now
members
carries
knew
an
what was
unspoken
happening,
sense
or at
of
least
permanence.
enough of it to ask questions they never followed up on. No one intervened. No one challenged the decision or offered support. The absence of reaction felt like a collective agreement that this was acceptable, that the rules of convenience mattered more than compassion.
Every night, the
I
same ritual.
realized how alone
Placing each
I
item,
truly was
hoping
in
the
this
order
moment.
here brings
In my
balance to the
attempts
chaos
to
outside.
understand, I imagined
We had
how
to
my
make
brother
cuts
justified
somewhere.
his choice. I could see the
The receipt
internal
showed
logic
us
he
where the
must have
compromises
built,
began.
one where responsibility
The numbers don't
replaced
lie.
relationship,
Even
and
with everything
self-interest
accounted for, the gap
masqueraded
keeps
as
growing.
fairness.
We can only cut
Perhaps he
so
told
much before
himself
there's
that
nothing
business
left.
was business,
Uncertainty
that
visible in
emotions
repeated
complicated things
recalculations.
unnecessarily.
The process feels
Framing
endless,
it that
offering
way
no
allowed
real
him
solution,
to avoid
only
acknowledging
survival.
the imbalance, to reduce our history to something manageable and clean. The contrast was impossible to ignore. 2 years of consistent support,
The morning alarm.
of covering rent without
A sharp
conditions,
interruption to shallow
dissolved
sleep.
under a single
I silence it
decisive
sluggishly.
action. All the
Relief
patience
never
I had
comes,
exercised,
reinforcing
all the
how
understanding
exhaustion
I had
has settled
extended
deeper than
meant
rest can
nothing
reach.
once I became inconvenient.
There was a pause, a moment where
The
resistance
realization
almost
wasn't dramatic.
surfaced.
It was
But the
stark.
message was sent,
Loyalty,
sealing
I
the
learned,
commitment
is
once
fragile
again.
when it
He
isn't
just sits
mutual.
there, completely
As I
oblivious,
packed,
while I feel like I'm running on
objects took on
fumes.
new meanings.
The gap
Photos
between us
I once
widens every
displayed
day.
without thought were placed into boxes, their edges worn from years of familiarity. Each image reminded me of a version of family I had believed in, one that no longer matched reality. Doors closed behind me with a finality that echoed louder than any argument ever could. Locks clicked into place, sealing not just rooms, but an entire chapter of my
Once
life.
again, she offered
Physical
her
weakness
agreement.
made the experience
The compliance
feel
was
surreal,
costly,
as if I
but the
were
burden
watching
remained
myself from a
entirely her
distance.
own.
I moved slowly, careful not to aggravate symptoms, while my mind raced ahead to what came next. Fear mixed with anger, but neither found a clear
The
outlet.
body
There
carries
was
what
no
the mind
confrontation
refuses to
release
confront.
it, no explanation that would make it make
The
sense.
words just blurred together.
The eviction existed
My focus
as
drifted,
a fact,
and the entire
unchangeable
office felt
and
distant,
impersonal.
like I was separated
What
by
stayed
glass.
with me most
Despite
was
the recent
clarity it
setbacks,
brought.
we must maintain
The illusion
perspective.
I had
The
lived
data
under for
suggests a
years
recovery is
finally
underway,
shattered.
provided we
I
remain
saw the
vigilant.
relationship for
I
what
canceled
it was,
again.
stripped of
Sometimes
assumptions
the
and
quiet
hope.
isn't restorative, it's
The
just
strong
heavy.
sibling, the reliable
Another
one,
night of
had
silent
value
endurance.
only as long as
The
strength
returns are
was
in,
convenient.
but the numbers no longer
Once
fit as neatly as
vulnerability
before.
entered the picture,
We're stretching
loyalty
thin, but
evaporated.
discipline requires us to persist.
Leaving that space felt like stepping into uncertainty, but it also marked the end of pretending. I no longer had to reconcile conflicting versions of family or justify behavior that hurt me. The loss of my home was devastating, but it also removed the last layer of denial. In that forced departure, I began to understand something fundamental about myself and the
The
boundaries
evening
I
was
had never
unusually
set.
quiet.
As I carried
The
the final
diagnosis
box
just
out,
lingered in the air,
exhaustion pressed
heavy
down
and
on me,
unresolved.
but so did a strange sense of awareness. The eviction had taken away my sense of belonging, but it had also exposed the truth I had
I'm not
avoided.
feeling very well.
Losing my home
may need a
hurt
little
deeply,
support.
Yet what followed
Sorry to
would
bother you.
reshape my entire sense of self.
No
in ways
reply
I
arrives
couldn't yet
immediately.
imagine.
Silence
Rock
stretching longer
bottom
than expected.
Isn't loud.
The absence
It's
of
quiet,
response feels louder
lonely,
than any
and
rejection.
painfully clear.
When the reply finally
It
comes,
doesn't
it is
arrive
brief
with
and
chaos
emotionally
or
neutral.
spectacle,
Concern
but
is
with
absent,
stillness that
replaced by
forces you to
practical
see what
acknowledgement.
you've been avoiding.
Searching for warmth
After
that
the
isn't
eviction,
there.
my life narrowed
same
into
emptiness, the
temporary
same
spaces
distance.
and cautious routines.
Illness has shifted their
I
value.
moved into
I was
borrowed
hoping we could
rooms,
discuss the deadlines on
places
finding
that
it
were
hard to
kind
keep up.
enough
I
to shelter
understand,
me,
but the
never
Q3 report
fully
is due
mine.
tomorrow. I need the
Physical
updated
recovery
forecast by noon.
overlapped with this
Support has
transition,
not arrived.
each influencing
Only
the
awareness
other.
of conditional
My
care.
body demanded rest, while my circumstances offered no sense of permanence.
The body asserts its
Healing was
limits
slow
without
and
negotiation.
uneven. Some days I felt almost normal, convincing myself I was improving faster than I was. Other days, fatigue returned without warning, reminding me that recovery
They don't
doesn't
even
follow
notice, do they?
schedules or deadlines.
The world just keeps spinning,
I learned
full of
to measure
laughter and
progress
sunshine,
in
completely
small
indifferent to the
increments.
darkness in here.
In moments where I could breathe without strain, or move without planning every step. These small victories felt muted.
The walls are bare,
overshadowed by
the lighting
uncertainty
neutral,
that
offering
surrounded me.
shelter without comfort.
Anger, which
The
I
space feels
expected
safe enough to
carry me
rest,
through this
but not
phase,
enough to belong.
never fully arrived.
The simplicity of what she now
Instead,
owns is
emotional
striking and
numbness took its
humbling.
place. The
Life has
intensity
narrowed
I
into
thought I would
essentials
feel
only.
dissolved into a dull quiet, a protective layer that kept everything at a distance. I wasn't furious, and I wasn't sad.
The thing with
in
your brother,
dramatic
it's,
sense.
well,
I
it's
was
not
simply
exactly clear.
empty,
We thought it was sorted, but
conserving
now there are
energy in ways
complications.
I hadn't consciously
I'm not sure what to
chosen.
tell you.
The absence of strong emotion was unsettling, yet strangely calming. In that stillness, reflection became unavoidable.
I remember the support I received,
without the constant
and I'm
demands
grateful.
that once defined my days.
But that
I
chapter
began to
is
see
definitely
how thoroughly
closed.
I had allowed my boundaries to erode. I replayed moments where I had said yes when I meant no, where I had minimized my discomfort to
How much
preserve someone
effort
else's
once
comfort.
went into
Each
maintaining
memory
balance.
surfaced gently,
Without that effort,
without
imbalance reveals
accusation,
itself naturally.
Yet carried a weight I could no longer
A choice
ignore.
is made not to reach
I
out.
revisited decisions
Not from
I had
anger,
once
but
dismissed
from
as
clarity.
necessary sacrifices.
Re-end.
Skipped appointments.
The East Asian
postponed
female
plans,
narrator notices how
quiet
calm their body
compromises that
feels
felt
despite
small
the
at the
information.
time. I
There
saw
is
how
vision.
easily I
I've
had
realized that progress
deprioritized
is measured
myself,
internally,
convinced
not against
that
anyone
endurance
else.
was the same as generosity.
And looking back now, my
It became clear that no one
Evening
had forced
settles
these
gently,
choices on me.
lights
I
low,
had made them
atmosphere
willingly,
calm and
believing they were
familiar.
temporary.
An elder.
Recognizing that truth was
As
uncomfortable,
night deepens,
but it
an
was
East
also
Asian
honest.
female narrator closes
Grief
her eyes with
emerged
steady
in
breathing.
layers. I mourned the relationship I
Morning
thought I
begins
had,
without noise
the
or
bond
urgency.
I believed was
Light
mutual.
filling the room
More
evenly.
unexpectedly,
An African-American
I grieved the
fever-
version of
Breathing is
myself
steady,
who
thoughts
believed that
ordered,
self-worth
attention
was
grounded.
proven through usefulness.
Stillness now feels
That
intentional
version had
rather
been
than
earnest
imposed.
and well-intentioned,
Choices no
but
longer
also
require
vulnerable to
internal
exploitation.
negotiation.
Letting
Clarity
go of that
handles what
identity felt like
anxiety
losing
once did.
something familiar, even though it had
A
caused
thought
me
of the
harm.
past arises
The
briefly,
spaces I occupied
then fades without
reflected this
resistance.
transition.
There is no
Morning
emotional
light
charge.
filtered through
The
unfamiliar
South Asian male
windows,
narrator engages in a
illuminating
simple
rooms that
activity,
held none of my history.
fully
I
present
listened
and
to
unmeasured.
sounds that weren't mine,
A
adjusted
moment
to
of
rhythms
silence
that belonged to
stretches
someone
without
else.
discomfort.
These borrowed
Stillness now
environments
restored and
mirrored
drained.
how I felt internally.
Quiet confidence guides
present,
my day.
but
I
unanchored.
trust my own pace,
Each
pausing
day
without
began
guilt,
and
letting
ended
care
without
guide
the
every
markers
decision
I once
naturally.
relied on. Yet within
brief
that
reflection
disorientation,
surfaces.
clarity
How much energy
slowly
once
formed.
went into maintaining
Without
peace
the
for
noise
others.
of obligation, I could hear my own
Fatigue
thoughts
is
more
honored
clearly.
instead of
I
overridden.
noticed how calm began
Care
to replace
has fully
confusion,
replaced control.
how rest created room for insight. The
Strength
quiet
now
that once
comes from
felt oppressive
alignment,
started to
not
feel
endurance.
instructive, offering lessons I hadn't been able to absorb before. I realized that hitting bottom didn't mean total collapse.
Strength
It
once
meant
meant
arriving at a
endurance.
place where
That
denial
definition no
was
longer
no longer
applies or holds
sustainable.
power.
I could
Strength
see
now
the
lives in
patterns
discernment
that led
and
me
choice.
here. The choices rooted
A
in
familiar
fear
routine
of conflict
unfolds
and desire
smoothly,
for approval.
free of urgency.
Acknowledging
Each
them
movement
didn't
feels
absolve
intentional.
others of
Morning light returns
responsibility,
with the same
but
softness
it
as the days
returned
before.
agency
A young adult
to
South
me.
Asian male narrator
As
wakes
days
without
passed,
checking emotional
my
temperature or
physical
physical
strength
limits.
gradually returned, and with it, mental clarity.
Evening settles
I no
in
longer
calmly,
felt
the
compelled to
narrator
justify
preparing for
what had
rest
happened,
without
or
reflection.
to seek
Choices no
validation
longer
from
require
those who had
internal
remained
negotiation.
silent. Their
Clarity
absence spoke
handles what
clearly enough.
anxiety once
The
did.
numbness began
Morning
to lift,
begins quietly,
replaced
sunlight
by a
spreading
quiet
evenly across the
determination
room.
to
A
understand
middle-aged
myself
African-American
more
male
honestly.
narrator wakes without
In the
expectation.
silence of those borrowed rooms,
The young
surrounded
narrator
by
notices how
evidence of
silence now
impermanence,
supports
the
rather than
question
pressures them.
finally surfaced.
Stillness feels
It wasn't
spacious.
about
Evening
blame
settles in
or
gently.
fairness,
There is
but
no
about
sense of
choice.
incompletion or
I
unresolved
asked
meaning.
myself
The day
why I
ends
had
whole,
stayed
grounded
in a
in
dynamic
lasting peace.
that required
There is no
me to
metric
disappear
for
to keep
productivity
the
or
peace.
value here.
That question
present
lingered,
is enough.
unresolved but powerful, signaling the beginning of a shift I could no longer postpone. Healing began the moment I stopped asking why he did it and started
As the
asking
day moves
why
forward,
I allowed
the
it.
African-American
Because
male
that
narrator with a
question
thoughtful
shifted the
expression
focus
remains
back
centered
to
and
where
balanced.
change was
Morning light
actually
returns
possible.
softly, unchanged by
Until
circumstance
then,
or
my
memory.
thoughts had
An East
circled
Asian
around
male
his
narrator in his
choices,
30s wakes
his
with a grounded
justifications,
awareness.
his absence of empathy. Letting go of that fixation felt uncomfortable at first, almost like surrender. In reality, it was the beginning
A
of
moment of
awareness.
decision arrived,
I wasn't
unburdened by
excusing
doubt.
what happened. I
This
was
wasn't about
finally
conflict.
examining my role in sustaining it. The shift from victimhood to understanding didn't happen in a single realization. It unfolded gradually.
A moment
through
of decision
quiet moments of
arrived,
honesty
unburdened
I
by
couldn't
doubt.
avoid anymore.
This wasn't about
I began
conflict.
to see how often I had defined myself by endurance, how being needed had become a substitute for being valued. Recognizing that pattern was unsettling, because it meant acknowledging that my identity had been built around
Morning light
self-erasure
returns softly,
disguised as
unchanged by
generosity.
circumstance or memory.
Boundaries,
An East Asian
a
male
concept
narrator in
I
his
once
30s wakes
associated
with a
with
grounded
conflict,
awareness.
took on a new meaning.
As the day moves
I
forward,
understood
the
that
African-American
boundaries
male
weren't
narrator
punishments
with
or
a thoughtful
ultimatums.
expression
They
remains
were
centered and
acknowledgments
balanced.
of limits. They clarified responsibility instead of blurring it. I started to see how the absence of boundaries had allowed others to decide what I owed, while I remained silent about what I needed. That silence, I realized, had been interpreted as consent. Self-worth followed closely behind that understanding. For years, I had measured my
replaced
value
by this
through
quiet
contribution, through how much I
suppose
could
memories
give
cast
without
the longest
asking for
shadows.
anything in return.
You know, the most
I saw
important thing
now
is
how
that we support
fragile
each other.
that measure
Exactly.
was,
Exactly.
how
That's what
easily it
family
could be
values are all
exploited.
about.
Emotional
This
responsibility,
family
I
requires
learned,
sacrifice
meant
and duty
recognizing
from
when
all of
support
us.
crossed into
Only then
self-neglect.
can we remain
It required
united.
honesty, not just with others,
I know this is a
but
lot
with
to
myself.
ask, but
As
you are the
these
only one we can
realizations
trust with
settled,
this.
patterns from
It
my
has to be
family
you.
history became clearer. Entitlement had often been disguised as closeness, expectations framed as natural extensions of loyalty. Emotional manipulation didn't always appear as overt control. Sometimes it appeared as silence.
I thought I had
as
everything under control, but now I'm not so
disappointment
sure.
Rather than
It's
expressed.
just so much pressure.
I
Take a breath.
recognized how these
gonna be
dynamics
okay.
had shaped my
Technology
responses,
promised connection,
teaching
but here
me
I
to
am,
accommodate
alone with
rather
this
than
decision.
confront.
It replaces conversation,
Reframing the story
blurring the
was
boundaries we
essential.
need.
I
With a single
resisted
tap,
the urge to
the
blame
last of it
myself
would
for
be gone.
everything that had happened, understanding that
choice did I have?
responsibility and fault were not the same. I had
What was
acted
meant
with
to be
good
temporary
intentions, but good
now
intentions
carries an
did not
unspoken
protect me
sense
from
of
harm.
permanence.
Reclaiming agency meant acknowledging both truths without letting either define me completely. I was not powerless, and I was not foolish. I was learning. Small routines anchored this transformation. I began
Every
writing
night,
in
the
journals,
same ritual.
not to relive
Placing each
events,
item,
but to
hoping the
clarify
order here
thoughts I
brings
had
balance
once
to the
avoided.
chaos outside.
Morning routines became
We had to make
moments of
cuts
intention
somewhere.
rather than obligation.
The The
I
receipt
paid
showed us
attention
where
to
the
how my
compromises
body
began.
felt when I said no.
The numbers don't
How
lie.
relief often
Even with
followed
everything accounted
discomfort.
for, the gap keeps
These
growing.
practices built
We can
a
only
quiet
cut so much
resolve
before
that
there's nothing
didn't need
left.
validation
Uncertainty
to
visible
exist.
in repeated
The
recalculations.
more I understood
the process
myself,
feels endless,
the less
offering
I felt
no real
compelled
solution,
to explain
only
my
survival.
boundaries to others. I no longer rehearsed conversations that justified my choices. Clarity replaced defensiveness. I realized
morning
that
alarm.
self-respect didn't
A sharp
require
interruption
agreement.
to shallow sleep.
It required
I silence it
consistency.
sluggishly.
Each decision I
Relief
made
never
in
comes,
alignment with that
reinforcing
understanding
how exhaustion
strengthened
has
a
settled
sense of
deeper than
stability
rest
I
can
hadn't
reach.
felt in years.
There was a
This
pause,
awakening
a
didn't
moment where
erase the
resistance
pain
almost
of what had
surfaced.
happened, but it
But the message
changed
was
how
sent,
I carried it.
sealing the commitment
Instead of
once
viewing
again.
the experience
He just sits
solely
there,
as
completely
betrayal,
oblivious, while
I
I
began
feel like
to
I'm
see
running
it
on
as
fumes.
exposure. It
The gap
revealed
between
the
us
limits
widens
of
every day.
relationships I had idealized and the cost of neglecting my own needs. That perspective brought a strange sense of calm, as if I were finally standing on solid ground. Understanding myself was empowering, but it also sharpened my awareness of the truth that remained unspoken. There were still consequences unfolding beyond my control.
Once again,
still
she offered
realities
her
I hadn't
agreement.
fully confronted.
The compliance was
The
costly,
clarity I gained
but the burden
prepared me
remained
for what was
entirely
next,
her own.
even though I didn't yet know how or when the truth would surface.
Karma doesn't rush, but it never forgets the receipts. I didn't witness its arrival.
The body
in a dramatic
carries what the
moment or
mind
through a
refuses to
single event.
confront.
Instead, it unfolded gradually.
The words just
in
blurred
fragments
together.
of information that
My
reached
focus
me through
drifted,
distance
and the
rather
entire
than
office
involvement.
felt distant,
I
like I
learned
was separated
piece
by
by
glass.
piece that the
Despite the
stability
recent
my brother
setbacks,
had
we
once
must
taken
maintain
for granted
perspective.
was
The data
unraveling.
suggests a recovery
Financial
is
strain
underway,
returned
provided
to
we
his life,
remain
this
vigilant.
time without
I
a
canceled
safety net
again.
quietly absorbing
Sometimes the
impact.
quiet isn't restorative,
Without my
it's just
support,
heavy.
expenses weighed
Another
heavier.
night of silent
The routines
endurance.
he had relied
The
on
returns
began
are
to
in,
fracture
but the
under
numbers
pressure.
no longer fit as
I heard
neatly as
about
before.
missed payments,
We're stretching
about
thin,
decisions
but
made in
discipline
haste
requires
rather
us to
than
persist.
confidence. Trust, once assumed, started to erode in his relationships with others as well. The pattern that had played out with me did not disappear. It simply revealed itself in new contexts, where patience and generosity were no longer unlimited. As the truth became harder to contain, family dynamics shifted. Conversations carried a different tone, one that
The evening
acknowledged
was
realities
unusually quiet.
previously ignored.
The
My
diagnosis
absence
just
created
lingered in the
space for
air,
questions
heavy
that had
and
never been
unresolved.
asked when I was silently holding things together. People began to connect details, to understand the extent of what had happened. The narrative
I'm not
quietly
feeling very
changed,
well,
not through
and may need a
accusation,
little
but through
support.
recognition.
Sorry to
I
bother
remained
you.
distant by choice. Revenge
No
never
reply
tempted
arrives
me in the way
immediately.
others
Silence
expected it
stretching
might.
longer than
I
expected.
had no desire to
The
confront
absence of
him
response
or to
feels
demand
louder than
acknowledgement.
any rejection.
Distance
When the
felt
reply
more
finally
honest than
comes, it is
retaliation.
brief and
It
emotionally
allowed me
neutral.
to protect the
Concern
clarity
is
I had
absent,
worked to build,
replaced by
without
practical
reopening
acknowledgement.
wounds that no
Searching
longer
for
needed
warmth that
exploration.
isn't there.
Walking
The
away
same
was not
emptiness, the
avoidance,
same
it was
distance.
preservation.
Illness has
While
shifted
his
their
sense
value.
of control
I was hoping we could
unraveled,
discuss the
mine
deadlines. I'm finding it
slowly
hard to keep
returned.
up.
I understand,
Recovery
but the Q3
continued
report
in
is due
ways that
tomorrow.
felt grounded
I need the
rather than
updated forecast
urgent.
by noon.
My
Support
health
has not
improved
arrived.
steadily, supported
Only
by
awareness
routines
of
that
conditional care.
prioritized rest and stability. I noticed how different my life felt without
The body
constant
asserts
vigilance,
its limits
the
without
pressure of
negotiation.
maintaining someone else's balance. The contrast was striking, even from afar. Symbols of closure appeared unexpectedly. Keys were returned through intermediaries, stripped
They don't
of their
even
meaning.
notice, do they?
Old bank
The world just
statements
keeps spinning,
resurfaced
full
as
of
quiet
laughter and
proof of
sunshine,
what had been
completely
given
indifferent to
and
the
never
darkness in here.
acknowledged. Calls went unanswered, not out of spite, but because they no longer belonged in my life. Each of these moments reinforced
The walls
the
are bare,
boundary I
the
had
lighting
set,
neutral,
confirming
offering
that
shelter without
distance was
comfort.
the right choice.
The space feels safe
I
enough
didn't
to
feel
rest, but
triumphant
not enough to
watching
belong.
consequences
The
unfold.
simplicity of what she
There was
now
no
owns is
satisfaction in
striking
seeing
and humbling.
strain replace ease.
Life has narrowed
Instead,
into
there was a
essentials
calm
only.
understanding that outcomes follow patterns, whether we acknowledge them or not. What had been built on entitlement could not sustain
The thing with your
itself
brother,
indefinitely.
well,
that
it's not exactly
realization
clear.
felt
We
less
thought
like
it was sorted,
justice
but now there are
and more like
complications.
balance being restored.
I'm not sure what to tell you.
As others adjusted their expectations of him, I adjusted my expectations of myself. I stopped waiting for apologies or explanations.
I remember the support I
Closure,
received,
I learned,
and I'm
didn't
grateful.
require agreement or acknowledgement.
But that chapter is
It
definitely
required
closed.
acceptance of reality as it was, not as I once hoped it would be. Letting go of the need to be understood freed me in ways confrontation
How much
never
effort
could
once
have.
went
The
into
story came
maintaining
full
balance.
circle without my
Without that
intervention.
effort,
The
imbalance reveals
support that
itself
once
naturally.
stabilized everything was gone.
A
and the
choice
truth
is made
stood on
not to
its
reach
own.
out.
I
Not
remained
from
on the
anger,
outside,
but from
observing
clarity.
without attachment,
Rein-
grounded in the life I was
The East
rebuilding.
Asian female
Closure
narrator
didn't
notices
arrive
how
with an
calm their
apology
body
or a
feels
confession.
despite the
It
information.
arrived quietly,
There is
in the
vision.
certainty that
I've
walking
realized
away
that
had been the
progress
most
is measured
honest ending
internally,
possible.
not against anyone
Freedom
else.
arrived quietly.
And looking back
the
now,
moment I
my
stopped
dreams-
trying to earn love.
Evening
And in
settles
that quiet,
gently.
I found
Lights
something
low,
steadier than relief.
atmosphere calm
My
and
health
familiar.
improved not through
An
urgency, but through consistency.
As night deepens,
Rest became
an East
intentional
Asian
rather
female
than
narrator
forced,
closes
and
her eyes
strength
with steady
returned
breathing.
without the pressure to prove anything. I
Morning
noticed how much
begins
lighter
without
my body
noise or
felt when it
urgency.
was no longer
Light
bracing
filling the
for
room
disappointment.
evenly.
Healing,
An African-American
both physical
female-
and
Breathing is
emotional,
steady,
began to
thoughts
feel like a
ordered,
natural
attention
state
grounded.
instead of a goal just
Stillness
out of
now
reach.
feels intentional
Independence
rather than
followed in
imposed.
practical ways.
Choices no
I
longer
rebuilt my
require
routines
internal
around my
negotiation.
own needs, choosing
Clarity
stability
handles
over
what anxiety
sacrifice.
once did.
Decisions were no longer filtered
A
through
thought of
fear
the past
of upsetting
arises
someone
briefly,
else.
then fades
Each
without
choice
resistance.
reinforced a
There
sense
is
of
no
ownership
emotional
over my
charge.
life that I
The
hadn't
South Asian male
realized I was
narrator
missing.
engages in a simple
Emotional
activity,
clarity came with that
fully
shift.
present and
a calm
unmeasured.
awareness that replaced the
A moment of
constant
silence
tension I once
stretches
carried.
without
I
discomfort.
finally understood
Stillness
how
now
much
restored and
energy had
drained.
been spent
Quiet
maintaining
confidence
a
guides
version
my
of
day.
family that
I trust my
required me
own
to
pace,
disappear.
pausing without guilt,
Boundaries,
letting care
once
guide every
misunderstood
decision
as
naturally.
rejection, revealed themselves
A brief
as
reflection
acts of
surfaces.
self-respect.
How much
They were
energy
not
once went
punishments
into
or
maintaining
ultimatums.
peace for others.
They were acknowledgments of what I could and
Fatigue
could not
is honored
give.
instead of
Holding
overridden.
those boundaries felt uncomfortable
Care has
at
fully
first,
replaced
but the
control.
discomfort faded as peace took its place. I learned
Strength
that
now
saying
comes from
no did not
alignment,
make me cruel,
not endurance.
and saying yes to myself did not require permission from anyone else. A new life emerged quietly, built on peace rather
Strength
than
once meant
obligation.
endurance.
My
That
days were
definition
no
no
longer
longer
structured
applies or
around
holds
crisis
power.
management
Strength
or
now lives in
unspoken
discernment and
expectations.
choice.
I filled my time with
A familiar
things that
routine
restored me
unfolds
instead of
smoothly,
drained me.
free of urgency.
Relationships that
Each
remained in my
movement
life
feels
did
intentional.
so
Morning
because
light
they were
returns
mutual,
with the same
not
softness as
because
the
they
days before.
relied
A
on
young adult
endurance.
South Asian male
This
narrator
balance
wakes without
felt
checking emotional
unfamiliar at
temperature or
first,
physical
but it
limits.
quickly became essential. Accepting the loss
Evening
of the
settles in
relationship
calmly.
was not an act
The
of
narrator
bitterness,
preparing
but of
for rest
honesty.
without reflection.
I
Choices
let go
no
of
longer
the version of
require
my brother I
internal
had
negotiation.
hoped for, along with the
Clarity
role I had
handles
played
what
to keep that
anxiety
hope alive.
once did.
There was sadness
Morning
in
begins
that release,
quietly,
but no
sunlight spreading
resentment.
evenly across
I
the room.
understood now
A middle-aged
that clinging to what
African-American
wasn't
male
real
narrator
only
wakes without
prolonged the
expectation.
hurt. Acceptance
The young
allowed
narrator
space for
notices
peace
how
to
silence
settle
now
where
supports
conflict
rather than
once lived.
pressures them.
Mornings
Stillness
took on a
feels
different
spacious.
quality.
Evening settles in
Sunlight
gently. There is
filtered
no
through
sense of
open
incompletion
windows,
or unresolved
unhurried and
meaning.
warm.
The day ends
Silence
whole,
no
grounded
longer
in
felt
lasting
heavy
peace.
or empty.
There is no
It
metric
felt
for
safe.
productivity or
In
value
that stillness, I found
Being present
gratitude for
is
what I
enough.
had learned, even from pain. The absence of constant noise made room for reflection, for moments of quiet satisfaction that required no audience. Closure
As the day
arrived
moves forward,
without ceremony.
the African-American
There was
male
no final
narrator with a thoughtful
conversation,
expression
no
remains
dramatic
centered and
reconciliation.
balanced. Morning light
Instead,
returns softly,
there was a steady
unchanged by
sense of
circumstance or
alignment
memory.
between who
An
I
East
was
Asian male
and
narrator
how
in
I
his
lived.
30s wakes with a
I
grounded
stopped
awareness.
measuring my worth through sacrifice and started honoring it through care. The life I built didn't need validation because it finally felt like my
A
own.
moment of decision arrived.
Looking back, I
unburdened
see
by
the
doubt.
story clearly now.
This wasn't about
without
conflict.
distortion or self-blame. I understand the choices I made, the patterns I followed, and the cost of staying too long. That understanding doesn't harden
A
me,
moment of decision
it grounds
arrived,
me. It
unburdened by
reminds
doubt.
me that strength doesn't
wasn't
come
about
from
conflict.
endurance alone, but from knowing when to step away. Some families teach you how to belong, and others teach you when to leave. I carry that lesson forward, not as a wound, but as wisdom. In choosing peace without permission,
Morning light
found a
returns
freedom
softly,
that didn't
unchanged
ask
by
me to
circumstance
prove my
or
worth
memory.
or
An
explain
East
my
Asian male
boundaries.
narrator in his
It
30s
simply
wakes with a
allowed me
grounded
to live.
awareness.
This story wasn't
As the
just
day
about
moves forward,
betrayal.
the African-American
It was about
male
learning
narrator with a thoughtful
self-respect.
expression remains
What I
centered
lost
and balanced.
helped me understand that love without
The young
boundaries
narrator notices how
eventually
silence
turns into
now
burden.
supports rather than
The
pressures
moment
them.
I stopped trying
Stillness
to
feels
please
spacious.
everyone,
Morning begins
my life
quietly,
finally
sunlight
felt
spreading
like my
evenly
own.
across the room.
Some
A
relationships
middle-aged
teach you how to
African-American
stay,
male narrator
and
wakes
others
without
teach
expectation.
you when to
Evening
walk
settles
away.
in gently.
This
There is
story
no
doesn't
sense of
end in
incompletion
anger,
or
but
unresolved
in
meaning.
peace.
The day
And
ends
that
whole,
is the real
grounded in
victory.
lasting peace.
If this
There is
story
no
made
metric
you
for
pause,
productivity
think,
or value
see
here.
family differently,
Being present
pass it
is
along to
enough.
someone who might need it too. You never know who's quietly living
As the day
same
moves forward,
reality.
the African-American
Stories like
male
this
narrator
only
with a
keep
thoughtful
coming when
expression
this
remains
space
centered and balanced.